It's time to explore wrestling's past and potential future with your weekly dose of a segment we call What If? Only found here on the WWE Podcast.
It is time for another episode of Rivalries, and tonight, if you guys listened to last week's episode, we did give you the topic for this week, and we're sticking to that, which is what if Kane did not unmask? And we're going to look at, myself and Anthony DeMarco, we're going to look at what would his career have looked like, the significance of that moment, and of course a lot more. But Anthony, welcome back to the show. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, man, jumping into a great time in WWE 2003, right in the heart of the Ruthless Aggression era, and right into the heart of one of Kane's only storylines involved for the World Heavyweight Championship, and that's really what led to his unmasking in the summer of 2003. Yeah,
this one is one of those moments that you remember where you were when it happened. At least that's how I view it. There are certain moments, obviously, in our lives with much more important events, 9/11, those kinds of things that everyone remembers where they are. There are certain moments in wrestling, like maybe the streak being ended at WrestleMania 30, Rock versus Austin, however many times that happened at WrestleMania 3 times. There are certain moments, and not to say that this was on that level, but for whatever reason, this sticks in my mind about where I was and watching this happen, because up to this point, Kane had been masked since he debuted in 1997. So we do the math here, 6 years almost 6 years he was masked. And for WWE to make this move, for Kane to take off his mask, it was a very surreal moment. I remember the crowd being somewhat quiet. And when he did the reveal, it was the crowd didn't know what to make of it. And I mean, you could provide your thoughts on what you thought in that moment when he chokeslammed RVD, which I believe he was tag partners with at the time. So how did you take this moment? Did you feel the significance of it? Were you even in the moment disappointed? What was your take?
Well, I thought it was very, very shocking because he was one of the most ominous characters in WWE at that point since his debut in the fall of 1997. But I think when you look at where Kane was at his career at that point in time, he had become a bit stale because early on in his career, obviously, he was kind of just the Michael Myers-esque monster heel. And he had his program with The Undertaker. He had the match at WrestleMania 14 against The Undertaker. They had another match at SummerSlam 2000 when The Undertaker returned as the Dead Man. He had done the whole thing with Pete Rose at WrestleMania. And I think it had been just about 2 or 3 years at this point where Kane had been on a babyface run, a good babyface run, but largely uneventful in the way of championships. And, he was just kind of stuck in the upper mid-card / tag team division of Monday Night Raw for the better part of 2 years in this era of the brand split. And I think that when you look at that point in time, although maybe long-term it damaged his character a bit and the legitimacy of his character, obviously trying to put the mask back on never really had the same effect again. But that being said, if you put yourself in the moment of WWE and the point in time of that character, I think it was a needed change for Kane. You could argue that was it the right time, but you look at Raw at that time and they kind of needed a fresh kind of storyline to go with aside from The Undertaker and Evolution running the show. And I think although maybe long-term it hurt Kane's character, it led to the best run of his entire career. You could argue that first, let's say, 6 to 8 months spent with him unmasked. So, I mean, it was shocking, certainly. But I think in hindsight, it led to one of, if not the most interesting angles of his entire career.
No question that that created instant interest in Kane. I mean, everybody knew in pro wrestling who Kane was. He was in the discussion with Austin and Rock and Taker. He was in that upper tier, that upper tier. And when he unmasked, it sent shockwaves throughout the wrestling world. And I can't say social media at the time because that wasn't a thing, which is amazing. That social media we actually remember a life when social media didn't exist. But if it had, I mean, I can imagine this trending and people making memes of it and it just exploding. But even back in 2003, when we didn't have Facebook, we didn't, again, no Twitter, no Instagram, nothing. It still made its rounds on the big wrestling websites, and people were commenting, and oh my God, it just created a massive buzz. And it was, as you said, it was a good just jolt of adrenaline into his career, which he needed it, as you mentioned. He did in a very, very big way. And was this the right move? We'll get into that in just a minute about what his career could have looked like. But looking at what did happen, yeah, I mean, he loses the match to Triple H on that Raw. He turns heel, and I remember some of the moments in that run that he had, lighting JR on fire, which was actually, and I don't mean this in a morbid way, but it was actually really hilarious to watch it. Just because you listen to JR scream, which was, I mean, you could tell it was just like dubbed over audio, and it wasn't actually Jim Ross. They had a stunt double. So I don't know. I find that one of the funniest, inadvertently funniest moments of Kane, when he was that monster that was unleashed from taking off the mask, and him choke slamming Eric Bischoff off the stage through a table, tombstoning Linda McMahon on the stage. Shane McMahon, I think didn't he light his testicles on fire? Or he hooked a car battery up to them or something in an ambulance match, and so he had some just absolutely massive moments that would not maybe have happened had he kept the mask on. We'll get into that, but what were some of your moments of that run that he had that you think are really significant and stick out to you?
Well, for me, I think it is the rivalry with Shane McMahon, to be honest. That if people remember the first ever episode I did when I started the Rivalry show here on the WWE podcast, I covered Shane McMahon versus Kane. And I thought that just in a lot of ways that was arguably Kane's most personal feud aside from The Undertaker. But the difference is his program with The Undertaker kind of just wrote itself, right? It is arguably the best story that WWE has ever told, but after the initial development, it kind of just went with the flow and wrote itself. With Shane McMahon, I feel like it was the most personal and ruthless feud that Kane had probably been in other than The Undertaker. And for Shane McMahon, I think it was by far his best rivalry because it was something other than him having to do with being a McMahon rather. It was him just being a loving son. And it really, in my mind, showed different dimensions and layers to Shane McMahon's character. And it all started with Kane tombstoning Linda McMahon on the steel stage on Monday Night Raw shortly after being unmasked. Mm-hmm. So for me, I think back to their series of matches. I think it culminated, as you mentioned, in the ambulance match at Survivor Series. They also had the last standing match at Unforgiven in 2003. They had that weird supper where they were eating in a fancy restaurant leading into their match, which was kind of cool and weird all at the same time. There was when Kane attacked Shane in the hospital, Shane kicking Kane into the fire in
the dumpster.
It was a big. Exactly.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
It was just a very cool rivalry that I thought brought out different dimensions in both characters. And then obviously I think the culmination of that initial heel run for Kane was at WrestleMania 20 that you were at Madison Square Garden when The Undertaker returned as the Dead Man. So those are the two things that really stick out to me when I think of Kane's initial unmasking.
It does. That was a nice run that you just went over and put a nice timeline in my mind that I have not put together in a good 15 years since I've seen it. But it also reminds you about Survivor Series actually being a pay-per-view that wasn't just a contrived manufactured rivalry between brands, and it actually had some meaning behind it, whether it was this match or, of course, the traditional 5-on-5 that they would be put together every single year. But yeah, this Shane McMahon and Kane, I remember Shane McMahon, getting completely destroyed by Kane, and I know that a lot of hate goes on Shane for how he sells sometimes, or that he can go toe to toe with whoever and it's not believable and his punches are bad, which there's a lot of validity to those arguments, but no one can argue the fact that Shane McMahon puts his body on the line like his life on the line every single time he gets in that ring. He does not hold back, and he doesn't pull any punches, so to speak. He just takes a beating and makes everything look good, and I can never take that away from Shane. So I completely have all the respect in the world for Shane McMahon, the way that he performs, and just sacrifices himself. But that aside, as Kane gets to Taker, which obviously was the WrestleMania after he unmasked, yet we saw what happened, and we saw the lead up. He buried Taker with the backhoe, which was, I think, a great storyline to bring back from the American Badass back to the Dead Man. Everybody wanted it. Kane did that at Survivor Series, I believe, right? Didn't he bury Undertaker at Survivor Series? And we didn't see him until WrestleMania, as I believe Taker had a match with Vince McMahon on that pay-per-view.
Yeah, exactly. It was a buried alive match between Vince and Taker, and then Kane was hiding in the loader, and there was or the backhoe, and then there was like the explosion, and then I remember that image of like kind of Kane beating the Undertaker into the hole and telling Vince McMahon to get in the backhoe and dump the dirt on Taker, and Kane's kind of just standing in front with the dirt falling behind him with his arm in the air laughing. And it kind of solidified Kane as this new monster heel. And he was already kind of at that level, but like for him to go after the Undertaker, who was on SmackDown at that time, we had not really seen them cross paths in over a year because of the brand split. And like I said, Kane, for quite a while now, had not been even close to the level that the Undertaker was. And you look back at Kane's WrestleMania matches in between his bouts with the Undertaker, between 14 and 20, and they really are kind of uninspiring. I think he went up against X-Pac at WrestleMania 15. At WrestleMania 20, it was a tag team match, I believe, with Rikishi against D-Generation X. 17 in a triple threat match with Raven and the Big Show for the Hardcore Championship. WrestleMania 19, he wasn't even on the card. He was on Sunday Night Heat in a tag team match. WrestleMania 18, one-on-one match with Kurt Angle. So I think that in between his initial WrestleMania and to where he had got to before the unmasking, Kane had kind of been like a forgotten guy way too often, in my opinion, aside from when he was tagging with The Undertaker. Like, you could argue that aside from his program with the Undertaker, his biggest rivalry to that point was the two-man power trip against the Brothers of Destruction. Yep. I think that at that point, Kane had yet to blaze his own trail as a main eventer beyond just his initial debut because of the story that kind of wrote itself. So when he buried The Undertaker and brought back the Dead Man gimmick, even though it was in a losing fashion at WrestleMania 20, I think it did a whole lot for his character.
Yeah, I could see that. I would say that it wasn't as good as the WrestleMania 14 match. I remember watching it in person, and people were all into it because Taker was just so damn over. And I also remember, and I wasn't in attendance for this, but the Rumble before that Mania, when Kane came out, and then I think the very next entrant, the lights went off and there was a gong. That gong had one of the biggest pops I've ever heard. And anybody that doesn't know what I'm talking about, just go YouTube it. I think just search Royal Rumble 2004 Undertaker. Undertaker didn't appear, but the gong that went off signified that, yes, we are indeed getting a match between Undertaker and Kane, but also that it's going to be the Dead Man that's returning, and people were ready for the Dead Man to come back and come full circle. But I'll never forget the pop that just a single gong made. It was absolutely insane. But yeah, look, Kane, I think, was, while they didn't have as good of a match and even really as good of a story leading into 20, which was still really good, but WrestleMania 14 was just magic with those two, with the story that was told. One of the best storylines maybe WWE has ever produced, in my mind, was the Undertaker-Kane storyline leading into 14. And 20, they kind of tried to replicate that, and it was fine. I thought it was good, and it was all about Undertaker's return, of course, with Paul Bearer returning as well. And Paul Bearer went on to talk about how he was called by WWE, and he was so out of shape though that he couldn't physically get in the ring with the Undertaker. And that's just sad. I'm not trying to bring the show down, but at the same time, just give people perspective of where he was, where Paul Bearer was at that time, and why they brought him back, because he's part of the Undertaker. But anyway, as far as Kane goes, after this, I mean, he kind of moves on into when did you probably know this better than I do with Ruthless Aggression era. Where did Kane go after Taker beat him at Mania? Do you remember?
Well, that's what I'm trying to think back, and I know he eventually turned babyface, and he started kind of working a program with Gene Snitsky and Edge, and well, that's it. That's how it originally started. Is that he started that weird angle with Lita, where he impregnated her, and then he had the match against Matt Hardy at SummerSlam in 2004, and then the night after that he like chokeslammed them off the stage and like married Lita and in like the black wedding where she came out in the black wedding dress. And then somewhere along the way he actually turned babyface and he had the whole program with Gene Snitsky, the guy who then punt kicked what was believed to be a baby.
It was a baby doll, but oh my God, yes. Imagine that today.
Yeah, exactly. It was completely outrageous. Just an outrageous whole bit. But he eventually made his way back to babyface, and then he was involved in the first ever Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania 21. Shortly thereafter, he was actually like on the same side as Lita. I remember they would have like really awkward like makeout sessions on Raw. And then eventually he had a program with Edge because Edge turned heel and he became Lita's new boyfriend. And then Kane actually went on a very good tag team run with the Big Show, and I remember this very clearly when they became the Raw Tag Team Champions from about October 04 to October 05 rather, right into the early summer of 2006. And I thought that when they had the Raw versus SmackDown rivalry, the first time in a very organic rivalry between the two brands, I remember they booked him and Big Show very strongly as the guys that would always try and take out Batista for Team SmackDown. So, I mean, I don't think he maintained himself at the main event level for quite as long as you would have wanted to post-Undertaker, but he still found his way in some upper mid-card programs, a pretty personal feud with Edge, and then a really nice tag team run with the Big Show as the Raw Tag Team Champions.
Okay, well, that does ring a bell with me a little bit, and I knew you'd come through. I have a very foggy memory. Jeez, Fozzy. Yeah, I got Jericho on my brain. But yeah, no. So that is a bit of a recap of what happened with Kane. As we all know, it's already done and gone. It's in the history books. But let's now shift our focus to what would have happened if Kane just kept his mask on. Like, what would have been the implications? Would it have taken his career to new heights, or maybe it possibly would have kept him capped at a certain level? I guess overall, my question is to you, and take this any direction you'd like. What do you think Kane's career would have looked like if that moment never happened and he never took that mask off?
I think in a lot of ways we would have looked back on it as more fondly, because I think that there's always a part of that character that you forever lost when you remove the mask. Kind of how Rey Mysterio, aside from some pictures and some mistakes along the way, we've never seen him without the mask. But with Kane, because they unmasked him, which ultimately became fairly early on in his career because he had just about a 20-year run when it was all said and done, I think that you did kind of lose something, that he spent such a large chunk of that career without the mask. And in a lot of ways, he was more remembered for being unmasked rather than masked during the peak of his career. By the time he put the mask back on in 2011, you could argue that his prime was long past by. But I think that at that time, we wouldn't have seen him go into the main event had he not unmasked. You know, he was involved in the Goldberg and Triple H program a bit that led to a triple threat match at Armageddon 2003. I don't think you could have gotten him to the same level to be the one to bring back the dead man version of The Undertaker had he not unmasked. And, you know, we saw what the mask had been doing to him in the preceding years leading up to it. Like, I liked him in a tag team with Rob Van Dam. I thought it was one of the more underrated tag teams. And Kane always had a knack for working out really good tag teams with what seemed to be random competitors. But as much as I liked him with the mask, and as much as I think that in the grand scheme of things, it would have maybe been better for our perspective of the character. If you look at it in real time, I think it was something that was really needed. And I still think that he got shafted along the way. I still think he could have done for another WWE Championship run. Like, it is absolutely crazy to me that he only had one run with the WWE Championship during his entire career, and it was for a day that he won and lost it to Stone Cold Steve Austin the very next night. I know he had some World Heavyweight Championship runs along the way. I believe his most notable one was in 2010, where he actually had a program with The Undertaker, if I'm not mistaken. But, like, I just look at some WrestleMania matches he had, like what was it, 20 seconds for the ECW Championship against Chavo Guerrero.
Yep.
Like, so, I mean, I think there were a lot of positives and negatives, but either way you cut it, he probably should have gotten more of a main event championship run. What do you think?
Kane has been and will always be one of my favorites of all time. Stone Cold's my favorite. Not an interesting choice. Everybody knows that. But Kane is in my top three. I mean, Kane has, to me, been, as you mentioned, an extremely underutilized talent. And that's crazy to say given his career and everything he's done. But when you now look back and you go, man, it's too bad we don't have a guy like that here today, you know, because you don't appreciate the talent that you have. Like, you could have an A+ guy, but the problem is if you have A+++ legend, once in a lifetime performers, even like inadvertently, you will overshadow those excellent top tier talents that are a level below them because you have once in a lifetime talents like Rock and Austin and Triple H and Taker. And Kane is that next level down, but that next level down right now would be like Roman Reigns. Like, I mean, that's where I think Kane would have been if that other talent didn't exist. And I hope I'm making myself clear there, but Kane to me had, it was criminal that he did not get an actual proper WWE Championship run. It's insane. Now, to say that Stone Cold was not deserving of the championship, of course we know he was the hottest thing that pro wrestling ever pumped out, ever in any organization, in any era, ever, since the dawn of what pro wrestling became. Stone Cold was the hottest thing. So for him to win it back the next night, I had no problem with that. I had no problem with Austin winning it back the next night. The problem was I was like, oh, okay, they'll eventually give him a real run with like a 4 to 6 month run at least. They never did it. And I understand, like you said, he had the World Heavyweight Championship run in 2010. But as great as that championship is, it's not the lineage that the WWE Championship holds. It's criminal that Kane never got that opportunity to see what carrying the company would be like. The problem was his timing. While he got to work with some great talent, that those other talent were even more over than him, and therefore he got overlooked many times because of the other great talent that he had the privilege of sharing the ring with. But at the same time, it takes away from his opportunity of being able to carry the championship. And I've always been a fan of Kane, and if he didn't unmask, my take on that is I would have, like you, it's a little similar to yours, right? Like, I would have respected the character a little bit more where he didn't unmask. You always wonder what he looked like, even though if it's easily Googleable, or you can just look at Isaac Yankem, or you could look, wherever. It's easily fine.
Mayor of Knoxville.
Yeah, exactly. Mayor of Knoxville now, right? Like, yeah, he doesn't wear a mask to work. So it's easily something you can Google. But I think that the character of Kane would have kept its integrity maybe a little bit better, even though there were some great gains of him taking off the mask, primarily being able to work with Taker again, going on that monster run, just completely metamorphosizing into this unstoppable monster. I remember Kane actually had an interaction with Stone Cold as the GM of Raw many times and took a stunner and sat up. It was just great. It was really great to see him in that role, but he never got that run with the championship. It always boggled my mind that he never did. And outside of the other talent that were with him, because they were more over, I don't know the reason. Do you have any idea why they never gave him a real run with the championship?
The only thing that I could really take a stab at is the fact that they figured his character didn't need the championship. And I think a lot of times with these big monster characters, WWE feels, and this is even true with a guy like The Undertaker, arguably the greatest of all time, but that he never got a real run with the championship because WWE just thinks that those guys, the storylines that they're often tied into, don't need championships. And look at it, like Big Show never had a real big run with it. Even The Undertaker, like the last time he held the actual WWE championship was in 2002. So, I mean, he had a couple runs with the world title, but even him, he didn't get another good crack at the WWE championship until that one in '02. And then even in recent years, like a guy like Braun Strowman, okay, he got one run with the Universal title, but as we've covered in the past, like that's more necessity as opposed to them wanting to give him that run. So, I mean, I just think it's a common denominator here with a lot of big guys, like really monster characters, that Vince just feels that they're better used elsewhere. And Kane was a guy, like, I remember one of my friends, he always says the same thing. He's just like, if you were on Monday Night Raw and you pissed off the GM, he would feed you to Kane. And if you were on SmackDown, he would do it with the Big Show. And in a lot of ways, that was true. And I think in later years as well, Kane was kind of used as that utility tool where you would put him wherever, which way that you can find him. Because another underrated thing about Kane is that he's very comical. And we've seen it a few times where he's been able to show a comedic side of him. Obviously, probably most notably with Daniel Bryan and Team Hell No. But if you go back and watch it at his dynamic with Rob Van Dam in late 2002, early 2003, leading up to his unmasking, the vibe between them was very similar to what we see now with RK Bro. That, you know, Kane is kind of like the big Sears older brother, and Rob Van Dam was kind of like the younger brother stoner type of guy. So I think that it's because Kane, A, the character didn't so much need the belt, and B, they could really use him anywhere they wanted to.
It's funny you make that comparison. I was just going to say that's exactly how it felt with RVD and Kane, and they were a very underrated tag team. Of course, once Kane unmasked, that team was no more, and Kane went on to do what he did. But yeah, look, I mean, Kane in that environment doing what he did without the mask made a whole lot of sense, and I understand why they did it. I get it, and his run was still hellacious, but maybe you're right. Maybe Vince looked at this and said, hey, this guy doesn't need the belt. You know, maybe he doesn't need the belt to get over. He's already over. But I would argue, why not add prestige to the championship? Why is Kane here? Just to cause destruction? Does he not care about winning a championship? I would like him to care about something. And again, it's not that Kane had a bad career. I think Kane had he had an absolutely amazing career, but you always wonder if adding a few championship runs would have helped him, and not unmasking may have helped him. But the other point that you said about the humor, and Kane does have a great sense of humor, and he seems like a genuinely nice dude, which I hate to say because I try to keep kayfabe alive. I always, I still wish that he had scars all over his face, his skin was melted, and he was still this just demonic guy, but he's quite the opposite. And the comedic side of him with Team Hell No, I even remember the first time his character showed a little bit of comedy. I believe it was one of two things, and I don't know which came first. It was either the Spinaroonie that he did with Booker T, I think the night that he returned against the Un-Americans. I don't know why I remember that. Or it could have been with he was teaming with Hulk Hogan and The Rock on SmackDown, and he was cutting a promo, and he was doing it in a Hulk Hogan style and calling his fans Canaanites. That I remember was really funny. And I was like, whoa, okay, this is a different side of Kane. And just on a side note too, imagine a tag team main event on SmackDown being The Rock, Hulk Hogan, and Kane in a 6-man tag. I don't know who the opponents were, but just think about it. We got like WrestleMania main events on a weekly basis and took it for granted. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess just to kind of circle back on what if Kane never took off the mask, do you think that he would have gotten way too stale eventually and people would have begun to turn on him?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's why they felt they needed to take the mask off him in the first place, was that he was getting stale. And I agree. I do remember feeling that way of, okay, Kane, we understand what this character is. We need to evolve it. And I'm all about evolution. No pun intended, but I am. With a character, you should always try to find something new. It doesn't mean you introduce something new every week, But once you start to feel something's off, something's repetitive, the fans aren't responding to you the way that they used to, or you feel they should. I'm all about evolving. And with Kane, I mean, I think that if he didn't take the mask off, certainly there would have been some fans that are like, all right, can we do something? Maybe take his mask off and see where that goes. And I think it would have been inevitable. I don't think that WWE could have helped themselves. I mean, I'm surprised really now that they made it nearly 6 years to be able to wait that long for Kane to take his mask off, given how impatient WWE is at times with certain things that they have a trigger finger of just, blowing through the matchups or the scenarios or the big moments and not saving them. But yeah, it would have gotten stale, and they would have had to find other ways to kind of get him over, or at least keep things fresh. I don't know what that would have meant. Maybe changing the color of his mask to, like, I don't know, green and purple. I don't know. I mean, like, they could have done things differently with his mask to continue to keep him covered. But yeah, I think that would have been part of the reason that they felt he was stale, but not the whole reason. Just because you have a mask on doesn't make you stale. I mean, that doesn't. But look at Rey Mysterio. Rey Mysterio's made a career out of it, and I don't like Rey Mysterio as a character, but he's been over and is one of the greatest of all time. So.
Yeah, and I guess one of the lasting things I'll say is that I think that in the long run and as a whole, him unmasking got to show how talented of a guy he really was. And obviously, the Kane mask character, the initial rendition of him, will always be probably the best. But what he was able to do through his unmaskings and play more comedic roles and more serious roles and more babyface roles, like, it really showed how talented of a guy he was. And I think about him being able to pull off a gimmick like Corporate Kane. Like, the fact that he was able to do that coming from the big red machine guy who was caught in a fire and then be a corporate stooge for the Authority, yeah. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And I mean, I thought at the beginning, like, oh my God, this is going to ruin the legacy of Kane. But thinking back on it, I almost think it helped it because it showed just how brilliant of a performer he was. Like, what was your opinion on Corporate Kane?
Corporate Kane. Well, he ended up in Corporate Kane, didn't he? I mean, it's hilarious that he is now living Corporate Kane. But I think that Corporate Kane at first I was not a fan of, because to me, I was such a big proponent of the original version of Kane, and I was a stickler on that. But after seeing it for a while, like you said, it did allow for a different range of his talents to be shown. Even in the Broken Skull sessions with Stone Cold, when they had Kane and Austin had their conversation, he did say that, while he enjoyed being that monster, he felt like he was getting bored and the fans were getting bored. And he had felt that he shown everything he could show in that version of himself. And he was really excited to be able to show other versions of himself, whether it was comedy, whether it was Corporate Kane. And he did that. And it's not something that I go back and YouTube. Like, I don't YouTube Corporate Kane best clips. Like, I mean, it's not something, I don't even know if a compilation like that even exists, but it wasn't something that I'll look fondly on and go, man, that was so great. That was so pivotal in his career. No, I don't. But it was a necessary step. I think it was it was an evolution of the character, as I just talked about. Was it the best? No. Was it the worst? No, it wasn't the worst either. But it was I guess a natural evolution of where he was. Turning into a corporate stooge, though, was weird. It was really weird. And he did tease at times of coming back whenever I think Seth Rollins and him gotten in like a face-to-face at one point, and he was punking out Kane, and Kane was saying that he's tried to suppress his demons or something like that. And Kane's mask made a couple of appearances backstage as if, he's going to come back and attack Seth Rollins. And I don't know. I haven't thought about that either in quite some time, but I don't think that Corporate Kane damaged his career, but I don't think it was this career defining, oh my God, moment either.
Yeah, I agree. And I just think that it showed that although you may have hurt the integrity of the character overall, I think it showed how talented the guy like Glenn Jacobs is. And I think that's my entire argument as a whole on this, or my entire opinion on this entire question that we've tackled today, is that all in all, I think you can make a big argument that it did hurt the overall integrity of the character of Kane and what it meant from, let's say, the first day we saw it to now how we look back on him. But him unmasking opened up like a Pandora's box worth of avenues and options for him to go down. And I think that he really knocked it out of the park in a lot of ways, whether it be comedy, whether it be his corporate gimmick, babyface, monster heel. I think that Kane as a whole, the guy Glenn Jacobs, was able to really broaden his horizons through his unmasking in 2003.
That's just it. And there has not been one interview I've ever seen with anybody that has said a bad word about Glenn Jacobs ever. They've said nothing but praise for the guy, and everything I've seen from him, he seems like an authentic, great guy and will bust his ass for you. And he did. And he just was a corporate guy, no pun intended, but he was, and he did his job and he did it well. And whatever they gave him, he ran with. And that is a testament to himself, and it's a testament to his work ethic, which has continued to work wonders for him in the political realm now. But he, I think, is a guy that you can count on. As Triple H once called him, he's the constant. And he is. He's the guy that was always there, always on time, just a professional's professional. And that's, I think, how Kane would want to be remembered, too. And, he's still one of my favorites of all time. Continues to be, the first time we ever saw him in Hell in a Cell was magic, and really through 98 and 99 to me were his highlights, even into 2000, and with the return of Paul Bearer and Tombstone Tory was really funny. If nobody knows what I'm talking about, just Google Tombstone Tory and you will see. But he has had some amazing moments. Yes, he didn't have a great run with the WWE Championship, and I don't know if we'll ever see somebody like Kane. Now, not Kane 2.0. Maybe this is my final question to you. Do you think that we will ever see another giant with a mask like Kane, but not trying to be Kane? Do you think we'll ever see something like that again?
I'm sure we'll get some kind of, I don't know, type of character along those lines as WWE gets more into a gimmicky type of role, and they'll bring in a guy like Omos or Commander Aziz, and I'm sure one day we'll see a guy with the size of one of those two guys, and he'll be trying portrayed as a supernatural figure. But here's the thing is that I think that if Kane had been introduced in a PG product like we're accustomed to today, a lot of people would have found it hokey because he wouldn't have been able to do a lot of the realistic but messed up things that he was allowed to do in a TV-14 environment. So I'm worried that if they try and bring in a character like that, because of the restrictions of PG, they will just turn the entire wrestler and character into a, I don't know, hokey type of spin-off of Kane and almost look worse than it is. Because to be honest, if Kane would have came into the WWE landscape in, let's say, 2010, when they had gone from TV-14 to PG, I don't know if the character would have worked because they would have had so many more restrictions to deal with. And I think that's why, as a whole, it's harder to get monster figures over in today's WWE. Like, I think a guy like Braun Strowman would have done a whole lot better in a TV-14 world because as a monster heel, you would have been able to do actually dastardly deeds to get over in that capacity. So while I think they'll eventually try and go down that road again just to try and repeat history, and they do have a love for like big heel monster types of characters, I don't think we'll ever see the successful rate as we saw with Kane.
Yeah, the PG deal is an absolute ceiling. I mean, you can only go so far. And what made Kane great was not the blood and guts and all the violence, although he did create a lot of that. But it was the moments of him lighting people on fire and the hocus pocus that it was hocus pocus, but believable hocus pocus, that they didn't make kind of a mockery of itself, that they took seriously, the announcers took seriously. It wasn't done in a cinematic way where there are cameras that have no business being there and why are they there? At least that's not how I watched it at the time. Maybe there was if I went back now with my 25-year-old more, I guess, seasoned brain watching wrestling. But yeah, there was just so much in his career that he had done And those moments of him doing all the things he did, I mean, tombstoning women, which I found hilarious. The crowd popped for that. I mean, I think he even choke slammed Trish Stratus, and like all these just things that you would never, ever, ever see now. Made his career, lighting JR on fire. It's not going to happen now. I mean, it's simply not going to happen. But when you think of Kane, you think of those moments. I think most people think about his debut. They think about his matches with Undertaker at WrestleMania. You probably remember Tombstone Tori or tombstoning Linda McMahon or chokeslamming Eric Bischoff, unmasking, that kind of stuff. And, there's really so much to dissect. And I don't think Kane gets the attention he deserves for his body of work throughout his career. I think he does deserve, because he's overshadowed by guys like Austin and Rock and Taker, when I think he deserves a lot more. I'm not saying he's disrespected, just that often the spotlight's not on him. And maybe that's fine, and maybe he enjoys that. He seems like a humble guy. But any other avenues that you want to just dissect, or are you good?
Well, I think we covered everything. I would just probably reiterate that I think that in the grand scheme of things, we were probably I can't even go one way or another, to be honest with you, because from the integrity of his character point of view, I really can't say that it wouldn't have been better for him to stay masked. But then I do think it did wonders for the guy, Glenn Jacobs, to show off how talented he was. By getting unmasked and becoming Corporate Kane and such. So it's a very hard question for me to ask myself, should he have stayed masked, and would that have been better?
Yeah, that's not, the question is not what do we think he should have, because that's you talk about how much speculation in that. It's just, what do we think would have happened? I'm not advocating for him to stay masked just for the sake of keeping a character's integrity, even at the sacrifice of overall reducing his achievements in his career, because, we got to keep him masked, but he could have done all this stuff if he didn't. I'm not saying that, but we'll never know, obviously, what would have happened if Kane remained masked. And that in subsequent years, they did try to put the mask back on him, but you can't put, what do they say? What's the old saying? They can't put the milk back in the udder. Once the milk's out, it's out. You can't put it back.
Okay.
It's kind of like that. And they tried, and the crowd was kind of ho-hum to it, mildly interested in it. But, so I'm a big fan of Kane, and I think after this, I'm going to go watch some YouTube clips. So.
Oh yeah, for sure. I loved it when he was first in shackles with the towel over his head.
Yeah.
That was such a great.
It's so great, and it's just that transformative moment. You're waiting for him to bust out. It's just and he even had his own movie at one point. It was it See No Evil? He was
exactly.
Yeah. I didn't actually watch it, but yeah, he had his own movie at one point, and I wouldn't say he was ever the face of the company. I'd say he was one of the faces. I mean, the faces of the company. You're talking top of the top. We all know who they are, but. He was a guy that, he had the luxury of being able to work with so many great talent, all-time great talent. But the downside, as I said, is that he was capped at his level, even though his level was great, but he was capped at it because the other guys were even more over. And I don't know if we'll ever see another guy like Kane. I do think that they will eventually bring somebody in that has Kane vibes, and they have a mask on him, and it's this mysterious man who's just this dominant monster. I think they'll bring some kind of element to that back, but if they do, I don't want Kane 2.0. I never want a knockoff bootleg version of a great star, so...
Well, the only thing about him keeping the mask on, we wouldn't have been subject to that horrid Kane versus Kane rivalry after the See No Evil movie. So
I forgot about that.
That was brutal. I think in reality it was actually Luke Gallows under the suit.
Was it? I didn't actually check out the identity of the person. That was it was interesting at first, but I remember they did that with Undertaker in the late mid-90s, I believe, of Undertaker versus Undertaker at SummerSlam. It culminated there. And this was bad. If you guys want to watch some bad moments with Kane, of course, Katie Vick is one of the most. Katie Vick is so bad it's almost good at this point because it's just so terrible. But at the same time, this was just bad, flat out bad with his I guess somehow another version of himself manifested in this time and space, and he was able to fight his old self. It was weird. We never got a reason why. Then there was this whole thing about May 19th with Kane, which we never got. Did May 19th ever get explained either with Kane?
I think they just dropped it as a whole because they knew how terrible it was.
Oh God, but it's just that kind of stuff. Is just that those issues linger today, don't they? Where they just have an idea and don't have a follow through. They don't have a destination. I mean, even back then, those problems were still there. Where somebody came up to Vince in a boardroom meeting or a production meeting and was like, the May 19th idea came to Vince, and then somebody said to Vince, "Well, Vince, where are we going with this?" And he's probably like, "I don't know, pal. We'll figure it out." It's like, no, you need to know where you're going and then work backwards. And it often seems that Vince does not work that way. So yeah, so that is if you ever want to watch a terrible storyline with Kane, it's I don't even know, when did that take place? What year was that?
2006, okay, following May 19th, and I believe they had a match at Vengeance 2006, and then the whole program ended on a Monday Night Raw in the summer of 2006. I think they just quickly pulled the plug and tried to pretend it never happened.
Yeah. I think he just destroyed that version of himself, and then we never saw him again with no explanation. I think.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. Well, this is a lot of fun because Kane is a guy that we have not done a whole lot of discussion about here on this show as a whole, because Kane is not an active performer anymore, and he's the mayor of Knox County and really living the real life corporate Kane style right now. And it's just one of those guys that I'm so glad we were able to talk about, because he, to me, was one of the biggest reasons I also got into wrestling, not just because of Austin and Rock and everything, but Kane was just so mystical and just so believable. And that is what drew me in as a fan. So.
Yeah, I agree too. I just think Kane's one of the most underrated guys that we had in our generation, and probably could have made the case to be a main eventer somewhere along the way had it not been for the Rocks and the Austins of the world.
I know. We're first world problems, right? We're complaining about Rock and Austin, but I mean, it's true though. Like if they didn't exist, Kane would have easily been at the top of the company. I mean, he could have had a monster run, but I mean, I'm not complaining because we got Rock and Austin, for God's sakes, but yeah. So anyway, this was a lot of fun. If there's anybody out there that wants to submit a topic to us, if something maybe related to this, send us an email at realwwpodcast@gmail.com. You can do that, or wrestling_audio on Twitter, and let us know what you would like to hear us discuss in terms of what if. It can be a what if of the past, like we just discussed, or a what if of the future, right? Like we discussed before, what if Austin never, or rather, what if CM Punk came back to WWE? I remember we talked about that a number of months ago. It can be a future what if or a past, but you guys send in your suggestions.
Yeah, as always, I think that you can get me, I know you can get me on Twitter at AdaMarco25, and you can catch me every Friday on Rivalries, as I covered Cena versus Jericho this past week, and that was the last rivalry that Jericho had before leaving the company until 2007 when he returned. So that was a pretty cool rivalry to cover.
Was that the return in 2007 where he came back and said nothing for 2 months? He just came back and he would or was that maybe 2010? I can't remember, where Jericho came back and he would just be pretending he's going to say something and then just doesn't say something and walks back to the dressing room. I don't know why. I can't remember when that was. It might have been 2010 or 2011.
Yeah, 2007, he came back with the Save Us thing, the Crack the Code case, right. And then he went toe-to-toe with Randy Orton, and he had short hair for the first time. And I think Jericho's another guy that explored so many different avenues of his character and evolved it and whatnot. And he's a very interesting character to dissect as well.
Cool. All right. Well, everybody go check out that episode of Y2J. It's available right now on our feed, and we'll be back next week. If you guys have suggestions, please send them our way. We're always open to them, and we'll be doing this again next week. Just as a heads up, we will probably be taking the weeks of Thanksgiving and Christmas off. Any holidays, we'll be doing a From the Vault version, just giving you guys a bit of a heads up. There won't be new versions of the show as the holidays get closer, but we'll be feeding your appetite with some older versions. So, Anthony, thank you as always for showing up here and discussing Kane with me, and we'll be doing this again in a week.
Yeah, man. Looking forward to it.
All right. Have a good night.
Take it easy.